Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and I'm really pleased to have back with us. It's been way too long. Journalist, contributing editor to Harper's and Rolling Stone, author of 6 books, including The Family, The Secret Fundamentalism at the Heart of American Power, and C Street, The Fundamentalist Threat to American Democracy. Jeff Sharlet, associate professor of English at Dartmouth College. His website, Jeff Sharlet, SHARLET, .blogspot.com. You can tweet him at Jeff Sharlet, JEFF, And Jeff, welcome back to the program.
Hi, Tom. Good to be with you again.
Great to have you. Great to have you. You've done such great work on these topics over the years and written such brilliant books. There was a story last week, or this last week, titled "Dozens of Members of Congress Meet with Religious Right Pastors to Drive Satan Out of Power in the Capitol." And apparently these people did not have Donald Trump in mind. What is the state of the fundamentalist Christian takeover of our political systems? I know one of the things that Trump campaigned on was doing away with the 1956 Johnson Amendment that said that if churches engaged in politics, they couldn't be tax exempt, which got all the Christians voting for him, or at least all the churches pushing for him. But what's going on right now? Where are we at?
I think the Christian right is as strong as it has ever been in U.S. history. And I had to say, although I thought Trump could win, I thought the Christian right was in terrible disarray right before the election, as did so many sort of longtime observers of the Christian right, both journalists and scholars. And instead of the sort of the bitter infighting post-election that we anticipated, I think a few of the never-Trumpers will probably be looking for employment elsewhere. And in all other regards, it has consolidated with that victory, but it's consolidated amazingly since then. This cabinet he's put together is probably the most fundamentalist cabinet we've had in U.S. history. There's other figures who are not part of that, but when you'll get Betsy DeVos, Ben Carson, Jeff Sessions, and of course Mike Pence, sort of reigning over it all. Not even in Reagan's times would you have find such an activist fundamentalist. You would have found people who were sympathetic to the Christian right, but these are the real activists. So I think those of us who are not fans of the Christian right, like probably most viewers of this show, we have a lot to be concerned about.
I consider myself a Christian. I would never characterize these guys as Christians. They don't believe. I mean, I define Christianity mostly by the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 25. You know, basically Jesus' teachings, and to the extent that I can, I try to follow those. And that's kind of my definition of Christianity, my personal. I mean, we all have our own personal definitions. But these guys don't follow Matthew 25. You know, the idea that as you do to the least among you, you've done to me. That feed people, heal people, house people, give people water, visit them in prison. The least shall be first. The stuff from the Sermon on the Mount. All of that stuff is it's not even window dressing for a lot of these Christian right guys. Instead, they're about killing people. I mean, they're sending their emissaries, as you've documented, off to Uganda to kill the gays and stuff like this. Or do I have something wrong here? Am I missing something?
I would disagree with you a little bit there. And I think, and maybe this is just sort of as personal as your Christianity is to you, but I think scholars of religion tend to recognize that when we speak of something called Christianity, we're talking about a vast, vast umbrella. And to say these guys aren't Christians, their tradition goes all the way back to the beginning. There have ever been militant Christians. There have also ever been Christians who are driven by compassion. And then there's also this sort of complicated ground where even someone like Betsy DeVos, and not enough attention is being paid to Betsy DeVos, the new Secretary of Education under Trump, should she be confirmed, as I believe she will, who is major funder of all kinds of hard Christian right initiatives, and her dearest sort of task is crushing public education. She is driven. I don't think there's any kind of, Betsy DeVos is not going in the back room and smoking a cigar and saying, ha, 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 I hate poor kids. She actually thinks her terrible ideas are going to help poor kids. She thinks she's driven by those same principles. Her motives, the motives are almost always good, except maybe in the case of Mr. Trump.
Who
And
doesn't,
that's why I
who
don't ever care
historically has
about
not
him.
called himself a Christian, by the way, which is particularly
He does call
ironic.
himself a Christian. Yes, he does actually. And in fact, a really fascinating piece of work on this is by a Christian right sort of B-list leader, a guy named Lance Wallnau, wrote a book called God's Chaos Candidate. And that chaos candidate is Donald Trump. He was one of those pastors who was repeatedly invited to Trump Tower to meet with Trump. And so he had that kind of inside track. He went skeptically. He was absolutely converted. But he also, like so many of Trump's evangelical supporters, the model they use is a biblical figure called King Cyrus. King Cyrus conquers Babylon and then sets the Jews free. But he's not a Jew. He's not, this is before Christianity. He's not a believer. And that's how they see Trump. They see Trump as someone who may not be personally devout, but is clearly anointed by God, has been chosen by God to do this work. And they also take a lot of strength in Trump saying he calls himself, and to them as many times said, I'm a Christian. You got to remember, Trump has a holy trinity of the people the three mentors. One, his father, Fred, we've heard a lot about. Two, Roy Cohn, who some remember as the McCarthyite lawyer
who was Jewish.
Yes, well, if Trump's not Christian, Roy Cohn's not Jewish. Roy Cohn, straight from the devil. A terrible, terrible monster of a man, like one of the great monsters of American history. And he was Trump's mentor. And Trump's third mentor that he talks about in all his books is Norman Vincent Peale, the mid-century preacher of the banal, author of The Power of Positive Thinking. And when you look at that,
you see the doctrine.
The prosperity doctrine, right? So Trump has always thought that he was a Christian. He just didn't think that anything was particularly asked of him except that he make money and be successful in winning. He understands Christianity as about winning, not about everything that we know it to be.
So he would have been comfortable in the Crusades.
I don't actually, it's not even a joke anymore, because we are now at the point of the new Crusades. And that's where the terrifying thing is, you have these Christian right leaders right in the cabinet. And then you have the guys who are seen as secular, like General Flynn as a national security advisor, and Steve Bannon, and even Mad Dog Mattis as Secretary of Defense. And it's true, they're not necessarily guided by their own piety, but their language, and when you look closely at it, is even more extreme in its Islamophobia. So General Flynn, when you look at his book, you see in public, he sometimes makes this talk about radical Islam versus Islam. And even that is on the road to Islamophobia. In his book, he doesn't make any distinction. All of Islam, to him, is the enemy. Same with Steve Bannon. And Steve Bannon, in fact, cites the sort of that crusading ethic. He uses the same language that the European far right, including maybe you remember some years ago in Norway, there was a mass killer, killed over 70
Anders
people.
Breivik.
Anders Breivik, right. And Anders Breivik called his manifesto 2083. And it was referring to 1683 when the Ottoman Empire was stopped in Vienna. That's Bannon's moment too. He goes back to that, and he talks about that, and he talks about the great clash of Judeo-Christian values. He talks about the resurrection of the church militant. So Crusades is no longer hyperbola. It is, in fact, the agenda, with the Christian believers and then the guys who care about nothing, it seems, but crushing Islam, and they're all in that same pot together.
Wow. So first of all, I'm curious what you think the likelihood is that they'll do away with the Johnson Amendment. The IRS functionally is not enforcing it anyway right now. In fact, churches are bragging about flaunting the law and preaching politics from the pulpit.
They're flaunting the law to a certain extent, but it could get much worse if the Johnson Amendment was actually stripped away. This was passed by LBJ, and it was sort of a Cold War piece of legislation. And the most important, yes, it stops churches from preaching from the pulpit, and that's crucial. But
preaching politics from the pulpit.
It also stops them from becoming super PACs. And when we talk about some of these big mega churches, we're not talking small numbers. I remember some years ago sitting with some folks who were involved with a liberal Christian initiative, and they were very proud. They had gathered $300,000 for their initiative. And I remember that I'd been reporting from a mega church just recently. It wasn't the biggest in the country. They took in $300,000 every Sunday in the collection plate. Now, if you could take those financial resources and put it directly into politics, now you have a game changer. Will Trump do it? That's a big question, as with all things, with all Trump promises. If it proves useful to him, I think he'll do it. I think he'll be able to do it. And
what would the impact of that be, of using Christianity for political power? What?
Well, I mean, we've been using Christianity for political power for a long time. Using Christian dollars. And remember, Betsy DeVos has been pouring money into candidates too. There was a good piece of reporting in the New York Times recently on how she managed to really essentially destroy Detroit's public schools, going against even the common sense sort of measures of accountability for charter schools that the Republican legislator and Republican governor wanted. She just told them all, she says, okay, you're all cut off from funding. And she funds so much. She's a billionaire. That meant something. She says, and let them know that she would finance primary challenges to them if they didn't vote the way she wanted to. And the Republican leadership said, okay, this isn't what we believe, but we're going to vote that way.
Yeah,
so
her and her family have basically owned Michigan, or controlled much of Michigan politics for several decades.
They've owned Michigan. They also helped found the Family Research Council, which is the sort of, in Washington, D.C., one of the premier kind of hard Christian right lobbying shops.
Hate the gays groups.
Yes, they funded anti-LGBT initiatives all over the country. So that money is already there. Now, imagine that, but imagine the control she has over Michigan, and now amplify that massively. I think that's the potential of undoing the Johnson Act.
So the big damage isn't that we're all going to have to bow down and pray every morning on our way to work. It's that our schools are going to get ruined, so that religious schools will have more money, more public money. Is that it?
It's going to be, yeah, it's going to be, I mean, what you really want to look at here is the way the Christian right agenda lines up with a kind of financial conservative agenda of privatization. And in figures like DeVos and figures like Ben Carson as well, and certainly in Trump, you see that merger. And I think so often liberals, when looking at Christian right, have been limiting their understanding of the Christian right only to social issues, and imagining, this idea that they're going to force you to pray to someone. They're not going to do that. I don't ever see the Christian right doing that. What they're going to do is they're going to gut the government and all the ways in which it supports freedom, including genuine freedom of religion, not the religious liberty they talk about, but the real deal. They're going to gut all that. And so that for many people, they're going to go to religious schools, not because they're forced to in their own mind, but because that's the only thing that's there. And that's already happened in Detroit. We can see what's coming in Detroit.
Right. Jeff, we have less than a minute left, about 40 seconds. What can we do about this?
Organize. And I can't tell you exactly how, but the one thing that I see too many in the liberal and the left doing is fighting over, they're still fighting the Bernie Hillary fight, talking about who did what. Put it aside.
Yeah. Or for that matter, they're still fighting the Hillary Trump fight.
Yeah. And the hour is now. Trump is here. And we need to organize to resist this. And that's the only thing. At this point, I have no criticism for anybody on the left or the liberals. We're all in this together now.
Yeah, amen. Jeff Sharlet, a journalist, contributing editor at Harper's and Rolling Stone, author of 6 books, including The Family, The Secret Fundamentalism at the Heart of American Power, and C Street, The Fundamentalist Threat to American Democracy, associate professor of English at Dartmouth College. Jeff Sharlet, SHARLET.blogspot.com. You can tweet him at Jeff Sharlet. Jeff, thank you.
Thanks, Tom.